Welcome to today's discussion, where we'll explore one of the most foundational and controversial concepts in Christian theology, the doctrine of original sin. Rooted in the story of Adam and Eve from the book of Genesis, this doctrine suggests that humanity inherited a fallen state because of their disobedience in the Garden of Eden. According to traditional interpretations, this singular act not only led to their expulsion from paradise, but also marked all of humanity with an inherent sinful nature. But here's the big question. Is it fair for an entire species to bear the consequences of one couple's actions? This belief has sparked centuries of debate, with critics questioning its justice, its alignment with free will, and its implications for human morality. In this video, we'll dig deep into these questions, examine how different interpretations shape our understanding of original sin, and challenge whether this doctrine holds up under philosophical and ethical scrutiny. The Genesis account, literal versus metaphorical. To understand original sin, we have to start at its source, the book of Genesis. The story goes that God placed the first humans, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden with a single command: not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Tempted by the serpent, they disobeyed, ate the fruit, and, according to traditional teachings, introduced sin into the world. Now, if we take this story literally, it means this event is a historical fact. Humanity, in this view, has inherited sin directly from Adam and Eve's actions. For many Christians, this interpretation forms the backbone of their understanding of human nature and the need for salvation. But what if we see this story as metaphorical? Some theologians suggest that it's a symbolic tale, designed to illustrate broader truths about human imperfection and the consequences of free will. This shifts the perspective entirely. If the story is allegorical, then perhaps humanity isn't literally guilty of Adam and Eve's actions, but instead shares in a more universal tendency toward imperfection. In this light, the traditional idea of inherited guilt becomes a lot harder to justify. Justice and the problem of collective punishment. One of the toughest criticisms of original sin is its concept of collective punishment. Think about it. Why should every human being bear the guilt of something they didn't do? By today's standards, punishing people for the actions of their ancestors would be considered grossly unjust. Justice is individual. Responsibility is personal. Yet original sin suggests that all of humanity is born guilty because of Adam and Eve. Some theologians attempt to justify this by arguing that humanity shares a collective identity inherited from the first humans. But even this explanation struggles under scrutiny. If guilt is tied to personal actions and choices, how can we be held accountable for something that happened before we even existed? It's a troubling question that shakes the very foundation of this doctrine: original sin and free will. The doctrine of original sin also brings up another big issue: free will. If we're born with an inherent sinful nature, does that mean we're predisposed to sin? And if so, can we truly say we have free will? Supporters of the doctrine argue that while humans have free will, they're deeply influenced by their sinful nature, making sin almost inevitable. This, they claim, is why divine intervention and salvation are necessary. But critics see this as a form of predestination, a system where humans are doomed from the start, no matter what they do. If we're set up to fail because of an inherited condition, is it fair to hold us accountable for our choices? This tension has fueled debates for centuries, particularly since Augustine of Hippo developed the idea of original sin in depth. Augustine's teachings even influenced the doctrine of predestination, which asks, are we truly free to choose salvation, or has our fate already been sealed? How other religions and cultures view inherited guilt. Let's broaden the lens. How do other religions and cultures approach this idea of inherited guilt? In Judaism, while the story of Adam and Eve is acknowledged, there's no equivalent to the Christian concept of original sin. Jewish teachings generally emphasize that humans have both good and bad inclinations, but are not born inherently guilty. Similarly, Islam recounts the story of Adam and Eve, but teaches that Adam repented and was forgiven. In this view, humans are born in a state of purity called fitra, and are only accountable for their own actions. These differences are striking. They remind us that the idea of inherited guilt isn't universal. Instead, it's a uniquely Christian concept, one that stands in stark contrast to other traditions, emphasizing personal responsibility and moral accountability. Modern critiques and implications. Today, the doctrine of original sin faces even more scrutiny from modern thinkers, psychologists, sociologists, and philosophers alike. For one, the idea that humans are born flawed or inherently guilty can shape cultural attitudes toward guilt and shame. Some argue that this belief fosters a negative view of humanity, one that impacts mental health and self-worth. There's also the concern that original sin creates a dependency on external redemption, on divine grace, rather than empowering individuals to grow morally through personal effort or social change. While Christianity emphasizes salvation, critics worry that doctrines like this discourage people from pursuing ethical behavior based on reason, empathy, and justice. Conclusion. The doctrine of original sin is a cornerstone of Christian theology, but it's also a doctrine under fire. From its implications for justice and free will to its role in shaping human self-perception, it raises some tough questions. Is it a literal truth, a metaphorical reflection of our flaws, or an outdated relic of a bygone era? Ultimately, examining doctrines like original sin isn't just about theology. It's about asking deeper questions. What does it mean to be human? How do we understand morality? And should the concept of inherited guilt have a place in our understanding of justice today? Thank you for joining me on this journey of exploration and questioning. If this topic made you think, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more deep dives into philosophy, religion, and the big questions that shape our world. See you next time.